Britain once controlled nearly 1/4 of the entire planet. Its ships ruled the oceans. Its banks financed global trade. Its currency powered the world economy. Yet this empire didn't fall because it was conquered. It collapsed because it slowly destroyed itself through debt, bad decisions, and a dangerous obsession with financial power. At the beginning of the 20th century, Britain stood at the peak of human dominance. No empire in history had ever reached so far. British territory stretched from Canada to India, from Africa to Australia, from the Caribbean to the Middle East. The sun truly never set on the British Empire. London was the financial capital of the world. British banks funded international commerce. British shipping companies carried nearly half of global trade. The British pound was the world's reserve currency. If money moved, it passed through London. If goods traveled, they sailed on British ships. If wars were funded, British bankers were involved. This wasn't just military strength, it was economic control. Britain had built the first modern global system, but beneath this image of unstoppable power, a quiet transformation was taking place. During the Industrial Revolution, Britain became wealthy by producing real things: textiles, coal, steel, machinery, railways. It created value. It built factories. It employed millions. But by the late 1800s, Britain began changing. Instead of reinvesting in domestic industry, British elites started exporting capital. They sent money overseas. They financed railways in India, ports in Africa, and infrastructure across Asia. Profit now came from interest, not production. Britain was slowly turning from a manufacturing empire into a financial empire. At first, this looked brilliant. Money flowed back to London from every corner of the world. British investors earned steady returns from colonial projects. The empire became a giant lending machine. But this shift carried a hidden danger. While Britain focused on finance, other nations focused on industry. Germany modernized its factories. America built enormous production capacity. Japan adopted Western manufacturing with astonishing speed. They learned from Britain and then overtook it. Britain still ruled territory, but it was losing competitiveness. And no empire survives that mistake. Then came World War I. The conflict shattered Britain's economic foundation. To defeat Germany, Britain borrowed massive sums, especially from the United States. Gold reserves were drained. Factories were damaged. Millions of young workers were killed. By 1918, Britain had gone from being the world's largest creditor to one of its largest debtors. It won the war, but it lost its financial independence. The empire emerged exhausted, indebted, and industrially outdated. Yet instead of rebuilding its economy, Britain tried to preserve imperial prestige. It attempted to hold on to global dominance without paying the true economic cost. This choice would prove catastrophic, because Britain was no longer strong enough to support its empire, but it refused to let go. And that refusal triggered a chain of financial disasters that would quietly dismantle the greatest empire the world had ever known. After World War I, Britain faced a harsh new reality. Its economy was broken. Its factories were outdated. Its workforce had been devastated, and its national debt had exploded. Yet British leaders refused to accept that the empire's golden age was over. Instead of rebuilding industry, they focused on restoring appearances. They wanted Britain to look powerful again. They wanted the pound to regain its former prestige. They wanted the world to believe nothing had changed. So in 1925, Britain made a historic mistake. It returned to the gold standard. This meant fixing the value of the British pound to gold at its pre-war level, as if the war had never happened. On paper, this restored confidence. In reality, it strangled the economy. Because Britain's post-war economy was far weaker than before, the pound became massively overvalued. British exports suddenly became too expensive. Factories struggled to compete. Orders disappeared. Unemployment surged. Entire industrial regions collapsed. Coal miners, steelworkers, and textile laborers were thrown out of work. But instead of adjusting currency policy, the government demanded sacrifice. Wages were cut. Public spending was reduced. Workers were told to accept lower living standards for the sake of financial credibility. This policy became known as deflation, and it crushed ordinary people. While bankers celebrated a strong pound, millions faced poverty. In 1926, the tension exploded into the general strike. Over 1 million workers walked off their jobs. Trains stopped. Ports closed. Power stations shut down. For 9 days, Britain was nearly paralyzed. The government broke the strike. But the damage was permanent. Trust between workers and elites collapsed, and Britain's industrial base continued to deteriorate. Meanwhile, Britain still carried enormous war debts to the United States. To repay America, Britain demanded payments from its former allies. France pressured Germany. Germany borrowed from American banks. Money flowed in circles. This fragile financial structure created the conditions for the Great Depression. When Wall Street crashed in 1929, the entire system collapsed. Capital vanished. Trade froze. Unemployment skyrocketed. Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1931, but by then, the damage was done. Factories had closed, skills had been lost, investment had fled. Britain's economy never fully recovered. Yet Britain still tried to maintain its empire. Colonies demanded infrastructure. Armies required funding. Administrations needed salaries. The imperial system was becoming increasingly expensive, and Britain no longer had the industrial strength to support it. Instead of generating wealth, the empire now consumed it. World War II delivered the final blow. Britain fought bravely, but victory came at an enormous price. The country sold overseas assets. It liquidated gold reserves. It borrowed heavily from America again. By 1945, Britain was financially exhausted. Its cities were damaged. Its economy was dependent on U.S. loans. And its empire was held together by force and debt. Britain had traded economic resilience for imperial pride. And now the bill had arrived. The foundations of empire were cracking, and there was no money left to hold them together. After World War II, Britain faced a reality it could no longer deny. The empire was finished, not militarily, economically. Britain had fought alongside the United States and emerged on the winning side. But victory brought no prosperity. Instead, it revealed how fragile Britain had become. The country was bankrupt. Its gold reserves were gone. Its overseas investments had been sold to fund the war. Its cities lay in ruins. And it now depended entirely on American loans to survive. In 1945, Britain received a massive financial lifeline from Washington. The Anglo-American Loan Agreement provided desperately needed dollars. But the money came with conditions. Britain had to open its markets. It had to remove imperial trade protections. And it had to make the pound freely convertible. These demands struck at the heart of Britain's imperial system. For decades, Britain had relied on a closed trading network. Colonies bought British goods. Britain controlled shipping. Profits circulated within the empire. Now, that system was dismantled. British industries were suddenly exposed to global competition. They were unprepared. American factories were newer. German production was rebuilding rapidly. Japanese manufacturing was rising. Britain fell behind. At the same time, nationalist movements exploded across the empire. India demanded independence. African colonies resisted control. Middle Eastern territories challenged British authority. Maintaining empire now required military force, and Britain could not afford it. In 1947, Britain made the most significant decision of its imperial history. It granted independence to India. This was not generosity, it was necessity. India had become too expensive to govern, too large to suppress, too costly to keep. The empire was being dismantled piece by piece, but Britain still clung to its global status. It wanted to remain a major power. It wanted to prove it still mattered. That illusion collapsed in 1956. The Suez Crisis. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain and France launched a military operation to seize it back. They believed they could act like imperial powers one last time. They were wrong. The United States opposed the invasion. Washington threatened to sell British currency reserves. The pound came under attack. Britain faced financial collapse within days. Without American support, Britain was powerless. The invasion was halted. British troops withdrew, and the world witnessed a shocking truth. Britain no longer controlled its destiny. The empire had officially ended. From that moment on, Britain became a junior partner to American power. Its currency lost global dominance. Its military influence shrank. Its political authority faded. Colonies gained independence across Africa and Asia. By the 1960s, the empire that once ruled a quarter of humanity had largely vanished. Not because Britain was defeated on the battlefield, but because it was defeated in the balance sheet. Debt replaced dominance. Finance replaced force. The United States had taken Britain's place. The dollar replaced the pound. American banks replaced British banks. American military power replaced British fleets. Britain had lost the world. Without losing a war, its empire collapsed under the weight of financial exhaustion. The cost of maintaining global control had finally exceeded the nation's economic capacity. And once that threshold is crossed, empires fall quietly. Britain did not lose its empire overnight. There was no single battle that ended it. No dramatic surrender. No final collapse. Instead, the British Empire faded away through spreadsheets, loan agreements, currency crises, and impossible budgets. It was dismantled quietly. By the late 20th century, Britain had become what it once ruled, a middle-sized nation navigating a world shaped by others. The empire that once controlled oceans now struggled with inflation. The financial capital of the world now relied on foreign investment. The country that invented modern banking now carried massive public debt. What happened? Britain made a fatal mistake. It confused financial power with productive power. During its rise, Britain built factories, railways, ports, and industries. It created real value. But during its decline, it shifted toward finance, debt, and overseas investments. It stopped modernizing its industrial base. It relied on interest income instead of innovation. It borrowed instead of rebuilding. This strategy worked for a time, but it hollowed out the economy. When crisis arrived, there was nothing underneath. Empires do not fall because they become weak. They fall because they stop investing in the systems that made them strong. Britain spent decades trying to preserve imperial prestige while ignoring domestic decline. It chose appearance over resilience, status over sustainability, debt over reform. The result was inevitable. The empire became too expensive to maintain. Colonies demanded independence. Allies dictated policy. Currency crises forced political decisions. Britain lost control of its future. The lesson of Britain's collapse is brutally simple. Military power follows economic power, not the other way around. You cannot project strength abroad while your foundations crumble at home. You cannot borrow your way to greatness. And you cannot maintain an empire without continuous productive renewal. This pattern repeats throughout history. Rome, Spain, Britain. Each empire rose through innovation and expansion. Each declined when it shifted from creation to extraction, from building to borrowing, from productivity to privilege. Britain did not lose its empire because others became stronger. Britain lost its empire because it stopped becoming stronger. And this story matters today. Because modern nations face the same temptations: easy credit, financialization, short-term growth, political vanity. History shows where that road leads. Empires are not destroyed by enemies. They are dismantled by their own economic choices. Britain once ruled the world, but in the end, it was undone by debt, decline, and denial. That is the dark economic truth behind the fall of the British Empire.